So last night, me and my friends were talking, and something that came up that I thought was really interesting is how all of us agreed that the 1980s feel more like the future than today. Despite the fact that we have so much more technology and all that, the 1980s feel more like the future. And I think that's so interesting because it kind of speaks to a thought that I've always had since I was a kid, that like the modern day doesn't have nearly as much of a unique feeling, of a kind of signifier you can put on it as the past. And I always chalk this up to, like, I think the conclusion that makes most sense in this scenario, that like we can see the past, you know what I mean? Like when I can go look at videos of the 80s from the beginning to the end, yeah, of course that's gonna feel more complete than, you know, today, which I'm living. I'm in the middle of it. You know, what's that phrase? It's like, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. Where it's like, you're not going to discover something if you're in the middle of it. And I've always just kind of chalked it up to that. Like, I've always just been like, oh, I probably just feel that way because, you know, I'm living in the 2020s. I, of course, don't know what they feel like yet because I'm in the middle of it. I bet when people were in the 1980s, they weren't feeling like they were in the 1980s. I think that could be true still, to be honest. I think that definitely could be the case here, and like everything I'm about to say in this episode is just me kind of speaking to feelings of that I'm falsely equating to things. I also think that there's a chance that the reason I have this feeling is because like we are the first. If you're you know born past the year 1995, you're part of the first generation where like you have the decades before you on video. You know what I mean? Like, if you were born in 1930, I guess there were some technology still, but, you know, for the most part, your dependency on, like, oh, what was 1910 like? You had to ask your parents, and they would tell you what happened. And, you know, that's obviously very different from now, where it's like, I've watched movies from the 80s, and I can look at that and go, wow, that's so different. You know, maybe in 30 years, they'll be watching the Marvel movies and go, wow, that's what life was like in the 2020s. Not, of course, the superheroes, but the people on the streets, you know, what they wore, what technology they used, what they talked like. Things like that. I think that's a real possibility, but moving away from that for a second, now that I've gotten the 5 minutes of prefacing done before we get into discussion today, because of how much I've been feeling this, and because I'm not the only person that has demonstrated this feeling, I do think there's something else going on. Like, I do generally believe that. I think that there's maybe something else at play here. Maybe even there's a you know, line of reasoning here that everything I just said is equally as true to the fact that there is something going on in the modern day that makes it so we don't have a distinct feeling. You know, I always think about how, like, if you go back to the 1930s, up till, let's just say, like, 1970. I'm making a huge generalization here. There's going to be a million red herrings you can point to of this analogy being wrong. Just heads up. But a lot of art you'll consume from back then is very much of that time. Like, people were making art taking place in that time, discussing that time, and you know, what is life like right now, and they're all windows into their time. They're dealing with unique problems of their time. Everything from Star Wars to, you know, The Great Gatsby is so of their day. Whereas today, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of art being made about the year 2025. There's a ton. But there's also a ton of art being made about the year 1930 and about the past and about, you know, all these different things that were happening back then. And there's so much. You know, maybe this could also be a case of culture's just so big. You know, maybe I am more familiar with that art that is about 1930 in comparison to the art that also exists about the modern day. That could be a part of it, you know. We've talked a lot on this show about how our algorithms define the way we see the world now, and I'm open to the idea that this could be a case that my algorithm, due to my own interests, is just predisposed to showing me Duchamp paintings from the 30s as opposed to, you know, the novels that, who's writing novels today? Colleen Hoover's writing that take place today. I think they take place. I've never actually read a Colleen Hoover novel. And honestly, I don't think I ever will be. No hate at all. I probably shouldn't. I don't like saying things like that, but definitely not my genre. You know what I mean? I think that there's a couple angles to look at this. One is that, like, as I prefaced, I think there is a genuine chance this is just a false feeling. And I think that a lot of you are going to say that. Like, I think that's probably going to be the general consensus of most people. But I can't deny that there's also, like, a ton of people colloquially that I've just spoken to that do feel as though there was a more distinct feeling to them. Maybe they're also having that false feeling. You know, maybe this is a case of, like, a bunch of people are looking back at the VHS tapes that they had, their parents had, and they're going, wow, things seem so much better back then. So they kind of try and emulate that, and because of that emulation, because of that almost like LARP that they're doing, it turns into something real, where now it is almost a fact of perception that the past did have more of a feeling than the present. Does that make sense? You know, that could be part of it. There's this thing I saw, I don't know if this is a real thing or if it's just like some guy made it up online, but I'm gonna use it anyways because I think it's a good way of speaking to it. Shout out to him. Don't remember the account. It was a reel, so I can't credit him because I scrolled past it. But he was talking about contemporary retro, and he was like how, you know, when you go out on the streets and you see people posting on Instagram with like their baggy jeans, with like their you know, chunky Vans and, you know, a rugby shirt over a waffle knit with like a bandana in their hair and like the yellow glasses. He was like, this is not retro because you're pulling from the 90s and the 70s and the 80s all at once. Like, you're pulling from everything. Like, it's you're not authentically dressing like a time period, but you are dressing in a way that is of the past. Like, you are making a very clear stance with that outfit of like, this is not trying to be modern. And that's a very interesting point too, that I've seen a lot of people talk about that. Like, the only look of the 2020s, not the 1920s. I'm not a time traveler. The only look of the modern day is like a bunch of pieces from the past kind of put together. Like, other than that, what do you point to? I mean, maybe, I think in the 2010s, you could point to like Athleisure, Supreme, that kind of stuff. You know, even like Yeezy, I think, had like a moment where like that was kind of like a defining look. You know what I mean? And I'm open to that idea that maybe that was a distinct feeling. But as far as like what I'm seeing now, it's all very much like, it's all in this very vapid state where I can't really look at anything and define it 100% of like, that's the look of right now, you know? And the things that do feel like they're the look of right now are all a bunch of pieces from all throughout the last 30 to 40 years mixed together, you know, that contemporary retro. And I think that, once again, is this a case of everybody is going and seeing the videos of their parents in the 80s and going, man, that seemed way better. Things seem so much simpler, both because of, you know, the fact they didn't have phones, but also because of very real forces, you know, politics, economics. These things do have an impact whether we realize it or not. You know, it was pre-COVID for sure. That undoubtedly has an impact. They're looking at that time and going like, wow, things seem so much simpler. They're trying to emulate it in a lot of ways. I think that could be, I think that's a very real idea, that like they are just having like a certain sense of nostalgia, and then because of that, this modern movement is coming from like them, instead of tapping into the modern day, emulating it, right? I think another part of this though too is like the amount of technology we have and the way that social dynamics now function does make it like very hard to make art around it, because so much of our social interaction, you know, whereas like you could write a novel about a scene in the 1930s, and you know, a lot of it will take place in cafes, or maybe, you know, you have a lot of third spaces where people are going to and doing communication, they're communicating. Since you have a lot of that, I think it makes it a little bit easier to create art around that. You know, what does the cafe look like? What does it feel like? What's the unique feeling in this cafe? You can play around with these elements to create art. when a majority of our social interactions now taking place digitally, it's like, how do you create art around that digital interaction that is not an oppositional commentary on the digital interaction? Does that make sense? Like, I think a lot of art around social interaction nowadays is almost a critique of the way that we do it and kind of existing in opposition to it, rather than being like, this is the art of Instagram. You know what I mean? And I think that that's also perhaps a reason why this is happening. I don't know, I think it's a mix of just so many elements that have caused us to be in this place where, whereas in the past you would look back in the modern day would be not a vector, but kind of like the vector for where art was taking place. You know, your painting would be of the world around you, or at least an interpretation of it. Even as abstraction comes, you know, even when you get to somebody like a Warhol, who is not painting a landscape by any means, his art is very much still of the 1960s. It's depicting the advertising. It's depicting the feeling of the 60s, the pop culture especially, the most obvious angle. I don't know why I didn't mention that first. You have that literally up until the modern day, where now it's like, I don't know what art of today looks like. I don't feel like that's the default anymore. I don't feel like our current environments are being used as a vector to create, or to go, I'm going to make a picture about this. And I wonder why that is. I wonder I think there's definitely, like I've been saying here, I think there's totally an argument that this is a mix of like a million elements. You know, like maybe it's social media mixed with the other thing too that I want to point to though is I don't think we're missing inspiration. Like, I think there's plenty of interesting things going on around us. Maybe, you know, the way that we look back on the art of the 1930s, maybe when people look back on the art of the 2020s, they'll just kind of look at it and go like, they'll just look at the content being produced as a whole and get an idea of what the world looks like, and the social interaction that occurs just from this giant amorphous blob of content is the art itself. Like, maybe Instagram is the art piece and we're all just kind of a cog in it. And as I say that answer, as much as I think it might be correct as far as how people like look at us, I hate that answer, because I think that's just like dumb. Like, so what, Mark Zuckerberg's the artist? Like, no. There needs to be individual people creating, and this is the world from my perspective. Because like, I feel like that's just a necessity, that has to happen. And it's not. That's where I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts. Like, what do you think the reason is? Not like, because I think there's probably a correct, actually, not an argument. I think there's a correct answer here, that there's not a singular reason, but rather like a million reasons altogether, right? Like, I think that's probably the correct answer. I think it's like, the straw is breaking the camel's back or whatever. There's a bunch of straws that are all breaking the camel. You know, terrible camel. Terrible straws. Don't know how it works. Never been on a camel. My brother has, though. Great photo of him on a camel. It was my phone background for a long time. But I'm not talking like, yeah, I think it's these elements. I'm talking like, if you guys had to choose one, what do you think the element is? Is it as simple as people don't have as much free time to create a new look for the 2020s? Because I've seen statistics. I mean, I'm not going to try and quote them because I don't know them like 100%. I try to avoid that because I don't want to spread too much misinformation with this show beyond what happens already. But I've seen statistics that like people have less leisure time and like free money now than ever. So yeah, I guess that makes it harder to make a painting that's uniquely about the 2020s, right? I mean, to be completely transparent with you guys, if these canvases cost $2 more, this show wouldn't happen. Like, these canvases are $1 a piece. If that wasn't the case, I would not be able to do this, because I just wouldn't have the money to support doing this every day. You know, maybe it could happen once a week, but it wouldn't be in the same form, and like, that's significant. You know what I mean? Think of, I'm somebody who's in a very fortunate position, you know what I mean? Like, to be able to do something like this. I've said, you know what I mean, 100 times, but I'm in a very fortunate position to be able to do something like this. Think of how many people, and I'm even in my fortunate position, I'm $2 a canvas away from not being able to do it. Not that I'm saying, oh, pity me by any means, but, you know, so many people have it worse, of course. I'm not trying to say that at all. But I'm just saying it is a case of, like, if I myself, somebody who's in a relatively fortunate position, am already $2 away from not being able to create art every day, and rather I have to be doodling in a notebook or something, you know what I mean? Which I was doing up until I had the money to do this series, actually. So I wouldn't mind that too much, but it's hard to create a unique style for that, you know what I mean? And I'm not going to be sitting here by any means creating, I don't think by the end of this series that I'll be coming up with a unique style for the 2020s. I'm not delusional. No, it would take 100 of me sitting together, working together in ways that I just don't know if is possible anymore, because we don't have third spaces, and if there are third spaces, nobody has the money in them to make a movement happen, you know? So maybe that's why. Maybe it's as simple as that. But I also don't know the statistics around that too well, so I don't want to give that as my definitive answer. But yeah, that's my thoughts for today. This painting's horrifying. I don't know what I did here, but I kind of like it. I think it's interesting. It's less deconstructive and more just like this guy's going through something. It'll be up on the Instagram this weekend. I was a little late to the last post, so sorry about that. But this will be up on the Instagram this weekend, along with a reel explaining all of it. So go check out the Instagram and keep up with me over there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, as I said, for about 10 minutes and lost my train of thought. And until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint and Talk, episode 141. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.